Somewhat lost in the news cycle this week is a headline that should shock, but actually is right in line with our country's timeline. In fact, the most shocking thing about this story is, as far as I can tell, there were absolutely no rainbow flags in due acknowledgement of Pride Month. But headline Central Florida, children 12 and 14 use AK-47 and other guns in shooting rampage on Volusia deputies. This shootout happened on Tuesday night, and on Wednesday, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office released select portions of officer body cam footage and overhead surveillance. These kids were runaways from a group foster home. They were problem children known to the Florida justice system, who apparently decided they'd like to become more known to the Florida justice system. And so they ran away from their care facility and they broke into a nearby home where they found firearms and engaged in a Grand Theft Auto style shootout with sheriff's deputies until the 14-year-old girl was shot and the 12-year-old boy surrendered. And it was a pretty good run. It was a roughly 90-minute 5-star wanted level standoff. And it's not just me making the GTA comparisons. That is apparently how the teen girl characterized the adventure. The younger boy tells investigators she said to him, quote, "I'm gonna roll this down like GTA." And like most GTA standoffs, she ended up wasted in the end too. But don't worry, she respawned at the hospital. And a lot of the reaction has fit your typical preset political molds. Why would police officers shoot a child? How could children get such easy access to guns? These are more hot take reactions to the immediate circumstances of the day and less deeper analysis of what created this situation in the first place. There are two major pieces to understand in this story. The first is the amount of patience and caution the police deployed in this situation. And the second is issues in the juvenile justice system that created the circumstances to allow this event to happen. As far as what happened on Tuesday specifically, both of these kids were runaways from the Florida United Methodist Children's Home, a group foster care facility where these kids lived due to past family, behavioral, and as we'll get to, criminal issues. When they were reported missing by the home, deputies began a search with urgency beyond just missing minors generally. As the sheriff explained, the 12-year-old boy is diabetic, meaning failure to find those kids quickly means potential immediate medical emergency.
So the deputies in the Deltona area go out looking for this 12-year-old and this 14-year-old because the 12-year-old is insulin dependent, and the 12-year-old, if he doesn't get his medication within 4 hours, it's going to be a critical medical emergency.
Police tracked these kids to a residential area, and a passerby tipped them that there had just been a forced entry into a nearby home. And this is where the police patience starts. Rather than pursuing those kids into that home, they stopped and called the homeowner first to ask if any of this was normal or expected.
They take a step back and contact the homeowner and say, should anybody have access to your home? As resources are pouring in to surround the property, the homeowner says nobody should be home.
So good job on the patience, but it turns out you're going to need more patience, because on the phone, the homeowner says, be advised, I have an AK pattern rifle and a pump shotgun and a handgun and 200 rounds of ammunition, all immediately available. And of course, that's where things get really tense for the deputies. You can watch on the body cam footage as police take cover positions behind trees, which is all that was really available. And for at least 30 minutes, these kids take up multiple positions within the home and fire upon police. At times, those shots sound awfully close, but police are given orders not to return fire, and they don't.
Shooting out the rear window toward my direction. Stand by. Female has a shotgun in her hand. Stand by. Put the gun down now!
Hey guys, just hold behind hard cover. Let's not shoot these kids, man. Let's just hold on. Take our time.
10-4, they're shooting at me.
And these kids aren't just shooting at deputies. They're allegedly making death threats while they do. And according to the sheriff, they're also trashing the inside of the home while deputies stand by.
That house, this poor guy, when he comes home with his family, they trashed his house. Deputies were watching as the 14-year-old with a baseball bat was shattering furniture, shattering toilets, shattering the tub, and we were standing by surrounding it because we didn't want to go in. Because if we would have went in and confronted them, everybody would be screaming, de-escalate, the cops are bad guys.
At one point, a sergeant even risked taking fire to toss his personal cell phone to the kids and try to make contact to speak with them rather than do any shooting, a gesture that was unfortunately unsuccessful. And why go to all these great lengths? Why sit passively under fire? Why allow someone's property to be ransacked? Why risk taking fire to try to talk instead of just swiftly ending the whole situation? Because the last thing these deputies want to do is to harm these kids. For all the talk of police being trigger happy, it certainly doesn't sound very trigger happy when this deputy is praying for any outcome other than pulling the trigger.
Don't make me do this. Don't do this.
And again, that's after getting shot at himself, not before. There was no thirst for blood in this case. There were only repeated attempts toward anything else, but ultimately, deputies were forced to return fire, and some of the coverage I've seen gives the impression that they just abruptly made a decision to take this girl out.
More than 30 minutes into the standoff, aerial footage then appears to capture police opening fire. The flashing dots are the bullets coming from the officers assembled behind the tree.
Now, in fairness to that report, it does mention the key detail afterward. The girl walked out of the home pointing a shotgun at deputies twice, and it's hard to tell from the overhead footage what exactly we're watching, but the deputies are off the right side of the frame and the girl is off the left, but you can see projectiles flying in both directions. It looks like police take a shot that goes through the car window here, and then there's something flying back at the deputies. Now, that could be gunfire at the police. It could be ricochet debris from police gunfire, but whatever the case, after 30 minutes of taking fire themselves, police had a clear shot, and when the girl ignored repeated commands to surrender and pointed a gun at them, they took it. The girl took 2 shots to the chest and abdomen. Police immediately applied medical aid. She underwent surgery and is, amazingly, expected to survive. The boy surrendered at that point. He was unharmed, and both kids have now been charged with attempted first-degree murder and armed burglary. A lot of social media scrutiny is being directed at that homeowner. Who leaves an assault weapon accessible to children? I just disagree. It's not accessible if it's burglarized. And we can debate the wisdom of somebody's firearm storage, but the firearm is still his property, kept within the confines of his broader property, his own home. If this guy left his truck in his driveway with the keys in the ignition, I wouldn't blame him if these kids stole his truck and tried to run over cops. When theft occurs, it's the thief's fault, nobody else's. Now, of course, there is some gray area when it comes to minors. To what extent are minors responsible for their actions? To what extent do minors have agency and developed senses of reason and morality? To what extent can minors even be criminals? And how should we handle them when they do commit crimes? These are the philosophical questions behind this story, and it appears that the state of Florida, or at least its juvenile justice system, is way on one side of these questions. The sheriff started his press conference on Tuesday night by ripping the group home at which these kids lived as a failure and a disgrace.
This all begins at around 5 o'clock tonight when one of our juvenile homes, which is a complete failure and disgrace to the juvenile justice system in the state of Florida.
To his point, there is a reason these kids were in this home, and there are several recent examples of this home producing bad outcomes. And when I say these kids, I really mean the 14-year-old girl. She appears to have been the leader of this operation. There's less known about the history of the 12-year-old boy, but according to the sheriff, this 14-year-old girl has a recent criminal history that includes theft and arson.
That 14-year-old that he runs away with, you may remember, over the last year or so, stole a bunch of puppies, gets put into a halfway house in Flagler County, burns the home down. So what do? They send her to Volusia County, because the juvenile justice system works so well here in the state of Florida.
I'm a little bit skeptical of this burning down a home claim. I do see record of a teen girl starting brush fires near homes in Flagler County at the time that he's referencing. This is back in April. There were no structures damaged in that incident, but big flames were ignited near homes. And I got to think if an actual home had burned down, that would have been news. I don't see any coverage of it. Regardless, even if the sheriff is embellishing a little bit here, this was still a serious crime. The teen faced 6 charges, including 1 felony count of criminal mischief. And the sheriff is also right that this group foster home that this girl was sent to has a recent history of serious problems. He says law enforcement was called to the home nearly 300 times in 2020, an average of nearly every day, and residents nearby say they're just used to seeing kids running away from the home and hiding in other people's property. And back in March, another teen in the home's care attacked a security guard for the facility, punching him in the head multiple times and killing him. So the kids have problems for sure. The home has problems for sure. But I think where the sheriff is just a little off is assigning all of the blame to this home, at least initially. The home isn't making decisions on justice. The home is just accepting the kids that the state orders into its custody. The president and CEO of the home issued a statement saying, "We are a child welfare facility, not a secure care facility. These children are in desperate need of care in the appropriate setting, which is a higher level of care than we provide." And because this sort of outcome is obviously unacceptable, the group home will no longer be accepting children on an emergency basis as they did for the two kids in this case. The CEO says this emergency shelter program is beyond the scope of the home's capabilities. An attorney speaking with local media says, "You're not supposed to put somebody who's going to be incredibly violent into some sort of group home setting. And the state's juvenile justice system gives judges the decision on what happens when a minor commits a crime." And that's a point the sheriff got to later in his press conference.
And when you hear about this restorative justice for juveniles, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. Because when you mollycoddle some kids like this, and they get their hands on more ammunition than some of my deputies had showing up here, it tells you how screwed up the system is.
If you send a murderer to a knife store and he kills people, you really shouldn't blame the knife store. If you send a kid with a criminal history to an unsecure group home and she leaves to go commit more crime, you really shouldn't be surprised then either. And can you argue this facility should have realized its own limitations earlier? Sure, but I don't see any evidence that this home deceived anybody about its capabilities or purpose. They aren't a prison. And the judge in this case, and many others like it, made an informed decision to send minors with criminal problems to this home, knowing it isn't designed for restraint or security. Well, what do you want? Kids in prison? No, ideally not. But I am frustrated how every debate about stories like this one becomes a state-focused debate. Oh, if only the state had just been more lenient. No, if only the state had just been more harsh. No, if only the state had just banned guns. If only the state would just defund this or better fund that. In other words, if only the state took better care of our kids than we do. There is no state replacement for mom and dad. Neither a cold, dark prison cell nor a cushy tax-funded vacation home on the beach can do it, and we shouldn't waste time pretending that they can. The more time we talk about how best to replace the family, the less time we talk about how best to preserve it. And I know you'll never have perfection. There will always be slippage through the cracks. There will always be kids in need. There's going to have to be some sort of state or charity or third-party role here. I get it. But my point is, let's realign our expectations away from what is the state going to do about it and back to what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do for our own kids and for our family's kids and for our neighborhood's kids? To give them a stable alternative away from GTA reenactments with a stolen AK. Because for all the demands we have to stack other people's money to climb our way out of these problems, that's a pretty basic ask to make of ourselves first. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.